Welcome, Martin Malseed, Chief Executive of Wealthcare Ireland. He's going to talk to us today about one of his roles in life as an accountant, and he's going to give us some insights into helping us with our taxes.
Okay, thank you very much, Turan. I'll try and be interesting, illuminating. I might be touching on very delicate points, which hopefully don't cause emotional stress, because sometimes that comes up in the work that I do. And sometimes I'm a bit flippant at times, but please don't take that as a fault. But it's just I try and talk about things in a sort of humorous way. But I say, for years I was an accountant, and I told you earlier, I had this conversation about something and come up with this Wealthcare brand. So I'm kind of passionate, because people spend their life trying to minimize their tax bill ethically and legally. That's so important, ethically and legally. But they miss so many things, and one of the topics I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about the 100% tax rate that can happen to people. And you're probably thinking, what the hell is the 100% tax rate that he's talking about? But I'll touch on that. But I'm going to just touch on three simple things for businesses. One is making sure you have a pension. I for a couple of years was involved with a bank. I worked for Griffin Factors, part of the Northern Bank, years ago. And last week I got a lump sum, and I thought, why the hell didn't I stay with my job? But the challenge when I do accounts for so many people, they don't have provision for retirement. I don't sell pensions or anything out there. So just in case you think this is some sales pitch, but obviously pensions are slightly tax efficient in that if you put money into it, it gives you basic rate tax, extra reliefs for basic rate tax. And the other thing then, obviously, the other issue that I'm passionate about is life insurance. Again, I don't sell life insurance, but I obviously think all the time when I see a person die, does their widow have something in place? And obviously, if a company is a limited company, they can create a certain life insurance policy, which is tax allowable. And the last thing I'm going to talk about in the realms of small business, but just business owners, is what, like, I sold my business, and the reason I was able to sell my business was the reasonable systems in place. But the challenge is, do people have, you see stories, people have died, and their widow would put business owners would put a thing up on their Facebook page. The business is closed for a few days. We're looking at things and stuff out there. In my profession, we're always told to have a trusted person who can step into our shoes and straight away continue the business on. And then my executors will discuss money with him or her at a later date. And the important thing, obviously, if you have a business and you have a client bank, and there's a bit of goodwill in the business, this mythical word goodwill. But if you've recurring business, recurring income streams, it's dreadful that sometimes you see it just parked. So I'd say to everybody, have a trusted person that knows all your passwords, and they only get access to that, obviously, when you end up either in hospital or very, very ill. The other thing is to have enduring power of attorney, lasting power of attorney. The danger is, I'm out on my bike at the weekend, push bike, fall off it, get concussion or whatever, not able to function properly, then somebody can step into my shoes. Because the other option, what happens, and it's a very expensive option, is that when somebody gets into difficulty, as the age or accident or whatever, and they need a power of attorney, if they don't have a power of attorney, they have to go through a court process. And we all probably know, and I'm not criticizing solicitors or barristers or the court system, but once you go in that door, you're talking about maybe $2 to $3 grand to get a power of attorney in place. Whereas if somebody's got a power of attorney now, it costs, I think, about 40. Actually, I can do powers of attorney in the area that I'm talking about later, but they cost about 40 or 50 quid. And it's just sort of a kind of a barrier of protection around your business. So I'm going on to say, when I sold my business, my main accountancy business back in 2008, I realized I needed to do something. So I then got involved in the realm of R&D tax credits. The reason why I got involved, it sums up my nature. As an accountant, these R&D tax credits are for limited companies only that are spending money on innovation, okay? So say a big salad company that I had the privilege of doing work for, they were spending money trying to get longer shelf life in their coleslaw, maybe get it with less sugar in it, maybe less salt in it, and they were spending lots of money on this. So in other words, they were trying to go where no person had been before scientifically, and there were capable, skilled people on the job. So consequently, say if a company, a limited company, spends £50,000 on that, which would be a write-off in their accounts, that tax break gets enhanced by another 125%. So that particular company were able to get back £300,000 to £400,000, and they'd never claimed anything. And it's not my skill. I'm not saying I'm skilled at R&D tax credits. I work with experts who are skilled at R&D tax credits, and they're not local, but they're experts. They employ all these geeky scientists. So it may not be for you guys, but you may know somebody. And if I get an introduction, the commission is really good. That's all I'll say. The commission is really good. So if anybody knows anybody, decent, chunky, limited companies in the R&D tax sector, that is where you can get what I'm passionate about, is building up passive income. Like I work with a specialist in that. I refer the company to them. The client gets loads of dough back, and I got a note from this guy who does the work, send me an invoice for whatever. And I'm thinking, sugar, I need to work 7 hours normally to get that sort of dough. Whereas here, just by simply making an introduction, I get paid. Nothing unethical about it. The client has got this money back they didn't expect to get. It's like getting a letter from the solicitor to say an aunt in America has died, here is the money. So that is one area. Another area of specialism, and again, it's for people who own shiny buildings. As I call it, could be own hotels, it could be shiny office blocks. The accountant generally used to classify all that as land and building additions. Boring, it would lie in their accounts, bit of depreciation on it, would lie in their accounts, and they wouldn't worry about it until it's sold. But within those buildings, there are all these things like light fittings, air conditioning, toilets, plumbing, electrical cabling, or whatever, which people can get generous tax breaks on. And so consequently, I work with these surveyors who go into buildings, and they do it in an amazingly skillful way. But what they do then is rework the guy's tax computations. This can happen to sole traders, can happen to partnerships, and can happen to limited companies. And generally, the better ones are those that have paid tax, because obviously getting a tax win, people are delighted to get a tax refund that they don't expect. So consequently, that is an area that I specialize in. I look out for shiny buildings. Every time I'm driving through shiny bit town and I see a fancy new office block or whatever, I'm thinking, who owns that? Do he or she know about the tax breaks within? So if anybody finds anybody, again, there's commission for people for just simply making that introduction to people. And the other one, which is coming down the road, which I'm just on the cusp of, is we talk about GDPR, and GDPR, they're experts in GDPR. And there are solicitors now advertising, did you have data with British Airways or whatever? Did you lose data? Did you have data loss with MasterCard or whatever? So consequently, the big challenge down the track is that there's going to be a massive claims culture around GDPR. So what I've been introduced to a company. We employ these because every company has touch points to say with individuals. Say an hotel, for example, I book into a hotel, they hold my details or whatever. I don't know what to do with the details, or else I go and visit a car showroom, or else I go to a bar and leave my details at the door. And they reckon there's going to be a massive claims culture. So in accountancy terms, to lower profits, if you anticipate a potential loss in the future, and it's backed by numbers and it's backed by law and working within the law, these guys are coming up with a potential claims for GDPR against large chunky companies, which can lower their profits and at the same time rework the last 2 years' tax returns. This is for large companies and get them decent dough back. And that is something which is going to be bigger, they say, than R&D tax credit. These are all genuine R&D tax credits is tax law 2000, capital allowances going back forever for tax allowances. But I'm gonna go on now to, when people talk about the, as an accountant, I'm going to talk about the 100% tax, and I see Turan wondering what the hell is Martin talking about there. I know nothing about the 100% tax, but as an accountant, we used to say to people, do you have a will? Because we're diligent people and we're scared of people dying intestate. Okay, so we're scared of that. But so we tell people to go and speak to Sammy the solicitor, as I call him, the guy who conveyed your house, who knows you or helped you, when you were fine doing 70 and the 60 or whatever, and went to court, and we'll trust that guy. And generally they will come up with what's called a mirror will. And what happens in a mirror will, when dad dies first, and I joke, dad works so hard in the house, dad does all the cooking and cleaning, dad will generally expire first and leave everything to mum. Okay, so mum could live forever in the home, okay, in the family home, and could be looked after by somebody like Declan, live forever, and mum could pass away, and mum could have a house worth £200,000 and £100,000 say in cash. So mum has got £300,000 and mum has died. Normally the solicitor then saying, say there's 3 children, here's 100,000, ignoring costs and all that stuff. Here's £100,000 to you, James. Here's £100,000 for you, Kathy, and here's 100,000. So what happens? The challenge is these guys get £100,000 in their bank account. If one of them was going through a divorce, that £100,000 would be up for grabs. If one of those guys inherited £100,000 and was really, 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 really well financially secure, and was maybe in their 70s, say, or maybe had early stage dementia or whatever, that £100,000 could either go, if they're very wealthy, it could end up falling into their estate for inheritance tax purposes, or else it could be caught for care costs, or else it could be the son. I had a client, for example, years ago, 2008 property guy, owned pubs, owned buildings everywhere. He used to do little envelopes showing that he was worth £1 million. And what happened around that time? His sister was was terminally ill, and she wanted to leave all her dough to him. She'd no dependent, no whatever, no children. She was going to leave everything to him. But the challenge was, if she left whatever it was, say £300,000 to him, there was a house and money. If she left all that to him, that would end up going to go to his creditors, who you could argue threw money at him irresponsibly, etc., etc. I'm not talking about the ethics of this, but the 300,000 from his sister would have gone to pay off bills that he didn't necessarily incur. So consequently, what we did on her deathbed, we drew up a will with certain things around it, barriers of protection, that money was protected. I'll go into a wee bit more detail on that later, but that was to protect people's money. So the reason why I got involved in sort of, I realized these mirror will things, really, it hit home with me when my dad was a good old-fashioned bank manager, lived in Port Stewart overlooking the ocean, left everything to my mum. His will was drawn up by the Northern Bank Executive Trustee Company, so you think they'd be really switched on when it comes to looking after people's property, etc., etc. So what happened was, prior to my mother's death, there was a lot of talk around North Down or whatever where I live about, oh, mum signed the house over to us. I didn't understand this, because obviously once you sign anything over, you're losing control of it. You know, if I lend my car to somebody for the day, I lose control of it. If I lend a pen to somebody, I lose control of it. So giving anything away, it just didn't stack up with me. So we went to see a solicitor who we thought was really good, and had advertised in his yellow pages, you know, inheritance tax specialist. We contacted him, and we brought my mother and my two brothers were there. And what happened was, we didn't really know what he did. He said, "No, it's sorted. It's all sorted." So what actually he did was he transferred control of that house over to my mother's 3 sons. Okay, so me and my 2 brothers. And it's the stupidest thing in the world, because we could have evicted her. We could have knocked the house down for development and put her into a tiny little post phone box down at the end of the road. We could have been other whatever. We could have got divorced during that period. We could have got into financial difficulties during that period. One of us could have died during that period, and part of that house would be up for grabs. So consequently, I went on my mother ended up dying in a car accident, and my mother had early stage dementia, and we dicked about regarding, you know, getting her off the road. And so if anybody's mother drives, and you say, well, she still drives, but she only goes around the block, take the keys off them. That's my advice. Be brutal, because it's no fun when the police arrive at your door, say your mother's died in a car wreck. So consequently, we ended up in a scenario where this house was worth £1 million at that stage, 2008. Port Stewart overlooking the ocean, and at the same time with a capital gains tax issue happening, because it was our property. But still, it was inheritance tax, because my mother continued to still live in the house. And we were going through, I was doing these spreadsheets showing what we're going to get, right? Sort of thing, taking all the taxes off it. But it was a nightmare, complete nightmare. Property prices dropped. I went through a divorce. All sorts of things were going on. And I said, look, there has to be a better way. So what I did, I got myself introduced to the world of trusts, protecting people's income. Uh, and the reason why trusts, people think of for rich people, they think of for MPs, or they think for people who own lots of land. But I'm going to call it your ordinary Joe should have a trust. I keep saying the mirror will, with the mirror will we talked about earlier, the last person standing could get mugged. It could be dad leaves everything to mum. Mum is in the family home. Mum ends up having to go into care. Mum may only have a small state pension. How is mum going to pay for her care? Families have shown me care home bills at about, £33,000. It's about 700 quid a week, I think, at the moment for care costs. Declan would know better than me, but it could end up the family home could go to pay costs. People say she's at home, she's hale and hearty, she's just a bit immobile, or whatever. So or else mum could have savings. Traditionally, older people have ISAs because they're a nice investment or whatever. But ISAs are rent for care homes, as I call it. Again, I don't sell, I don't give advice to people, but somebody having ISAs and stuff is the worst thing possible to have to happen to. So I found the world of trusts, and I'll give you examples of how, when I speak to accountants about trusts, they go into all the tax stuff, and I remember covering it when I was doing my tax exams, and it was scary. But when you're talking about an ordinary person with no trading activity happening, there's no tax happening if we look at it really simply. And the deal is, what happens is, I met a family, he was a client of mine, he was a minister of religion, he was 81, very hale and hearty, went to see him, brought my expert down to that stage because I found these experts who do this work, and the family were there the second meeting. When we went, we always encourage people, if you're dealing with people of a certain age and you're selling in the home, you have to be very sensitive about it. You have to give them cooling off period. You need to be very diligent about it. You need to give them, there's so many guarantees and protection. Obviously, you get the family in there. And I thought the family were going to think, these guys are here to rob my family's house. And I even thought at the beginning, when these trusts, the family are going to lose control of stuff immediately. It's going to be some fancy London lawyer charging zillions. There's going to be some fancy estate agent charging zillions, and the family are going to lose control. But once I got into the world, I realized that I became passionate about it. But because we're talking about death, people don't talk about it, unfortunately. People are very scared to talk about what happens if, in case there's seen to be money grabbing. But I'm going to touch on this family the first case I ever did was a reverend and his wife, and had the meeting. We draw a little picture, show the family what happens. In other words, on dad's death, his share of the family home goes into dad's trust, and mum then owns half a house with a trust owning the second half, and she's in charge of dad's trust. The kids are in charge of dad's trust. There's no other people involved in it. There's no wonderful weird companies with Cayman Island addresses. It's just a bit of paper, conveyance by a solicitor, where mum is the boss of dad's trust, and the kids then are second in command of dad's trust. Okay, so what we did there, we had this meeting, and the kids said to mum, well, what do you think about this? And mum said, well, we'll talk about it tomorrow with Ken. They said, mum, the way kids would do, go to the kitchen, go to Ken, have a cup of coffee, or get the kettle on, and go and have a chat. Mum and dad were out of the room, and the kid said, mum needs to do this, because we've noticed that she's not as sharp as she used to be. In other words, she's starting to lose it a wee bit, but she's still very coherent. Because obviously you need to be aware that the person needs to be aware of what's happening. So consequently, we did that work, and the family paid but 2,000 quid, I think, was that, to get everything protected. A few weeks later, I phoned, and what had happened, dad had gone into hospital with a stroke because he had the pressure of looking after mum, and he died. And so, yeah, the planning we talked about takes legs, as I call it. So you see what happens then. Mum is she continues house family home. She can stay in as long as she likes. She can upgrade, downgrade, or whatever, downsize or whatever. But mum ended up going into care. So mum only owns half a house. The other half owned by the trust. And a estate agent can't sell half a house. Imagine the fights over the remote control on the immersion heater in the bathroom, the queues in the toilet in the morning. So consequently, half a house is deemed to have zero value. So consequently, then what happened was mum went into care. Her house couldn't be got at. Obviously, the family can pay extra money to make sure she's in the kind of standard of care they want. but the state can't gobble away at the house. Because you do hear of people who go into care for ages, ends up they're left with nothing because their house is gone, and yet they're in the same corridor as somebody who's come from maybe humble beginnings with nothing, no savings, rented a house all their life, and they're eating the same grub, they're down the same corridor, and it makes people cross when you speak to people about their mum and how they've ended up in care. And again, we point out very few people end up in care. The other case that where you just see it happening. Several years ago, I get when I was in the zone for estate planning, I get some to breakfast by a lady I know, and I thought this is very interesting. She wants breakfast. She brought her 2 teenage kids along. This lady was divorced, and her husband had remarried a Russian lady. He was a guy in his 50s. He worked in the bank. So when somebody works in the bank, there's a death and service benefit, which will go to generally a spouse. And these kids, these teenage kids who were living with a mum, had been always assured by dad, don't worry, when you go to university, I look after you, make sure everything's paid for, the way people do, parents do. And what happened was this guy died suddenly of a heart attack after eating a burger. We don't know what was in the burger, but she died suddenly. And the family, all of a sudden, saw this wealth, that this going to a third, because you no will, a third of it goes to the Russian widow, a third who's only recently married, a third goes to her life interest, and a third goes to the kid. So the lady has a life interest in the third of this estate. So consequently, these kids then were going to be in a situation where they were losing their dad's inheritance because of he died intestate, and the family went and luckily the bank were very honourable about it. He worked for the bank, and they were able to make some provision for the children. But that is sort of one of the examples where you find people who haven't really thought things through, and that is where the Wealthcare thing comes up in my head, because we spend our life, people say, oh, tell us the tax bill, oh Jesus, it's time to pay the tax again, it's time to pay the tax again, and they're paranoid about paying tax. And you then say to them, look, do you ever think what happens about your inheritance tax exposure for somebody, say it's a couple, and they're between everything added up, they're worth about 700,000 to 800,000 or whatever. And you ever say, oh, don't worry, my kids will sort it all out. But the big challenge is if mum and dad just sail through life with a simple mirror will, and the money leaks down to the next generation. Say you have a child who's got a gambling addiction, like money can just, or a drug addiction, or you've got somebody in an unstable marriage, or you have somebody who is already wealthy, or else somebody who's maybe incapacitated in some way and may have to go into care. All that money that family had built up through all their hard toils could just go like that there. So that is why I do estate planning. And it just brought home to me recently, a guy I know died recently, very sort of big name in property in Belfast, and he'd remarried, and he had 3 kids from his first marriage, and his new bride, she had 2 kids from her first marriage, and the will, use of the will, as I say, is broken, and he has left everything to his new wife, okay, and then on her death, everything will be sold and divvied up between his 3 children and her 2 children. That was his will. Okay, that's fine. That's his will. But what happens if she remarries? Okay, what happens if she remarries? Martin Malseed, hearing that this bird is free, hearing this girl is free, starts courting her, as they say, and she says, and persuade her even to get married to me, which wouldn't be the cleverest thing in the world. And then she says, what about getting a will? I said, don't worry about the will. There's no need to get a will. Sure, we're going to live forever. And we could be in a situation then where she died suddenly. I get a third of everything for that poor guy. And the kids then will get a third, and then I'll get a life interest in a third. So it all sounds very morbid, but there's one fact in life, there's one guaranteed certainty in life, where you're going to die, and it's unfortunate. And when you start getting into the world of estate planning and death and all that stuff, the horror stories you hear about it, and families are very sensitive about it. They don't want to talk about it because they seem to be greedy, or we don't want to push too much about it. We don't want to be embarrassing about it. But have a conversation with your folks. Say, look, guys, have you thought about stuff? Have you thought about your wills? Have you got one of these simple wills? Where's your will kept? But they keep saying, there's an elderly man I met in Hollywood, accountancy wise, and he started to know and trust me, and he started to actually give me his clients, okay. And eventually I realized he was sitting on about 600,000 or 700,000 pounds. It was like he asked me to do his tax return, and he was a widow. And one day I arrived at his house by appointment. There was a card from a financial advisor, and I saw the card, because accountants can read upside down with supervision when it comes to reading stuff. And it was a financial. I said, do you have so and so advisor out there? He said, yeah, he did nothing with me, did nothing, because this was an elderly man starting to get confused. And eventually the guy revealed that he'd been sold a bond, which was rubbish for tax purposes, rubbish for any purposes, where the commission was 36,000 quid. And a local solicitor in Hollywood had introduced him. So the commission would have gone switcheroo there. And I just thought, and so consequently the guy died. And what happens was, this elderly guy had a simple will where everything was being left to his sisters who were in their 70s. Where you're looking at a perfect storm there for the solicitor, because you've people going into care, you have people with inheritance tax issues, you have all sorts of stuff going on there. And they love the probate thing, where like probate is really working out what a guy owned when he died and what he owed, taking away the difference, they fill in some forms, but they make a song and dance about it and make it go on forever. And ultimately, you've got to protect clients' money, and your simple will is just not a perfect fit for purpose vehicle.
Yeah, they always say death and taxes, that's the two things that are guaranteed in life, and you manage to cover both in the one talk. But it's essential talk, and I know as well from my parents passed away the importance of wills and stuff, so thanks very much for that information.